It's Good Friday. And this morning, I want to invite you to step into the story with me. To step into the story of one of the greatest days that humanity has ever seen. This morning, I want to invite you to step into the story of what Jesus has done. And Good Friday, we like to look at the cross, and that is the highest point of the day. But this morning, I would like to invite you to step with me into the garden. You can take a seat. When we think about Good Friday, we think about the event that happened at about 3 o'clock. Jesus giving himself and dying on the cross for me and you. And let me tell you, that is the high point of the day, because without that, we would not be here. Without that, there would not be freedom. But today, I want us to go a little bit back, rewind a bit, and look at something very, very important that happened on that day. You know, that day, Jesus went to a garden. Jesus, the day before, which if it was a Thursday, he had the Passover meal with his disciples. He shared a meal. He shared with them the bread and said, "This is my body broken for you." Shared the wine and said, "This is my blood that's going to be shed for you." He washed the disciples' feet. He announced that he was going to be betrayed. And I don't know about you, but when I think about doing all that, I'm like, it's a bit tiring, right? But after that, Jesus invites his disciples to go to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. So the Good Friday, the day that Jesus died on the cross, it starts actually in the Garden of Gethsemane. Probably about between midnight, 1, 2, 3 a.m. So the day where Jesus goes and saves us, dying on the cross, it starts much earlier. And I think there is a beautiful thing for us to learn from that. So let's read. You're going to read Matthew 26:36. And it says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples, to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there to pray.'" He goes there with his disciples, and it's a garden. But the first thing we need to know is the Garden of Gethsemane is not a garden as we usually think. You can see a photo. That is actually a photo of who is believed to this day where the Garden of Gethsemane is. It's a place that kind of like a farm, a little farm of olive trees. So it's a place where they would plant olive trees, they would grow olive trees, and then after that, on the same place, they would have an area where they would get the olives and make olive oil. So when we think about the place Jesus is walking in, is that place. It's a bit of a difference than what we know. And the thing is, the story about the Garden of Gethsemane is related in all the Gospels. And John, each one of them gives us a bit of more details. And John tells us that that place was familiar. It wasn't the first time Jesus was going there. Jesus had been there with his disciples before, probably to pray, to teach them. Jesus had been there before by himself to be with the Father. So that was a place familiar to Jesus. It was a place of prayer. It was a place of intimacy with the Father. And as we read, and we're going to read a bit more, you see that also becomes one of the places that Jesus has his hardest emotional moments. Is where the place where you see Jesus pouring his heart out to God. It's where the place where you see Jesus the most distressed you can see. And you know, I feel like we can relate to that. Sometimes the place where we meet God, the people that we see God through, the places where we see the most of God becomes a place that hurts us the most. It becomes a place where ended up like being that familiar place, but also a place of hurt, a place of despair. And the thing is, that happens not because it's trying to test us. The Garden of Gethsemane wasn't a moment for God to test Jesus and see, hey, are you going to go and die on the cross? But we live in a broken world. Jesus was human, and following God sometimes can be costly. And then I thought, why the garden? There were so many other places that Jesus could have gone. Right? The Garden of Gethsemane was on kind of the bottom, the valley of the Mount of the Olive. So the Mount of the Olive, if you continue reading the Bible, when it gets to Acts, when Jesus is ascended to heaven, that is where it happens. So you see here, Jesus in one of his hardest emotional moments, he can look up and see what the future looks like. He's like in distress in that moment, but he can look up and see the Mount of the Olive because Jesus knows the past, the present, and the future. And he knows, but that's the place where I'm going to go back to heaven, where I'm going to be glorified. And he chose the garden to go and leave those emotional places. And I wondered why. God doesn't do things without a purpose. And I think the garden, Jesus go to the Garden of Gethsemane because the story of humanity starts in a garden. In Genesis, God starts our story, the story of humanity in a garden. But it's also in the garden where humanity falls. It's the first place that humanity chooses their own will. And then you see many years later, Jesus about to accomplish all the promise, and he comes in that garden to start reversing the story. Because the reaction of Jesus in that garden is not the same as Adam and Eve had in Genesis. In Genesis, they decided to choose what I want, what I think is best, what my heart is desiring, and causing the fall. In that garden, Jesus expressed his emotions. He's going to say kind of what he wished would happen, but then we see what Jesus did. In verse 37 and 38, he says, he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, which is James and John. So just a point, Jesus took all his disciples, but then he goes a bit to pray, and he takes his three closest friends. So Peter, John, and James were the ones that were with Jesus in basically every single moment and saw everything Jesus had done. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, look at Jesus, the Son of God, looking at his human friends and saying to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Can you imagine a more human thing for Jesus to say? Jesus that just before with the same disciples was having a meal, saying he was kind of going to die and like making all those promises. In that moment, he looked at his friends. The human Jesus is looking at his friends and saying, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow. It's bothering me to the point of death. This is the center of the story here. Let me tell you what these words actually mean how it was written. So the word sorrow is lipe, and it means deep grief, distress, a weight carried within. The word for overwhelmed is perilipos, which means his soul wasn't just feeling sorrowful, he was surrounded by it. It means surrounded by sorrow, pressed on every single side. Have you ever felt that emotion when you're feeling so much that sorrow, that pain, that sadness, that you feel like there's no way I look, that this is not surrounding me? That's what Jesus is saying to his disciples. And to the point of death, Jesus is saying that not as an exaggeration. It means anguish so intense, it feels unbearable. The Jesus that was going to die on the cross, suffer everything that same day later, is saying that his feelings in that moment were unbearable. You see here, we don't see the calm and the composed Jesus that when the storm came and the disciples in the boat, he looked at them and was like, what are you worried about? When so many moments when they come to him and tell Lazarus is dead and everyone is sorrowing and crying, and he's like, it's okay. It's for the glory of God. I've got this. In this moment here, you see the fully human Jesus. The Jesus that is still fully God, but it's also fully human. I don't think there is any other place in the Bible that we as humans can relate so much to Jesus than in these moments when he share and say out loud those words. And Luke gives us a bit more of a picture. Luke tells us that Jesus was praying, and Jesus prayed 3 times. And by the way, do you know the disciples he took with him, his best friends? He said, keep here and watch with me. They fall asleep, right? Good friends. In a moment he's saying, I'm sorrowful, I'm like this, they fall asleep. Then Jesus goes back again and pray, and he goes back again and pray. But in that moment, Luke tells us that he was so stressed, the way he was feeling, that he started sweating like drops of blood. And let me tell you, science has proven that that's real. It's a real condition. And I'm going to try to tell you the name. If you know the name, you pretend I'm saying it right. If you don't, you can just learn it from me. Hematidrosis. Don't know if that's how you say it. That condition, science has proven that, is a condition where blood starts to ooze from your skin. And it's mainly from the eye, the nose, and the skin on your face. And it happens without any injury. It just happens because your body is put under so much stress, either physically or emotionally, that veins on your face starts to kind of explode that makes you sweat blood. Even the condition that Jesus faced in that moment is a human condition. Even what happened to his body in that moment of so much sorrow, of so much stress, is a condition that me and you can go through. I had at least 2 people coming to me after the first service today say, I've had that. I was so stressed once that my nose started bleeding. And when I went to the doctor said, it's because you're very, very stressed. You see how in that moment, Jesus is putting himself out there like me and you and showing how human he is. And I know that when it comes to Good Friday, we like to think about the cross because the cross is where Jesus suffered for us, where he went through all the physical pain so we can be forgiven. But I don't know about you. Sometimes when you're going through a moment like Jesus was going through, when your emotions are in that level that you think, I could sweat blood, when you're feeling sorrowful, you feel like you're surrounding yourself, that there's no way out of this, I can't run away, there's nowhere to go from these feelings, these emotions, I think dealing with a physical pain is much easier than dealing with an emotional pain, at least for me. Because, a physical pain, I can put a name on it. I can probably get a medicine or try to get it fixed, try to get it sorted. An emotional pain that Jesus was feeling in that moment, and please, I'm not diminishing what he's gone through on the cross and as he's arrested and all that. That is a whole new lot, and it's a lot anyway. But you see, the emotional pain that Jesus is going in that moment is because it's not a visible one. The cross is a visible pain. The moment in the garden is the internal one. And let me tell you, when Jesus prays and he asks God, he's like that. He's not trying to run away from the cross. He's not trying to escape it. He's just facing the full weight of it. In Matthew 26:39, it says, going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed. That's how sorrowful Jesus was. He faced the ground. My Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me. You see, Jesus being completely vulnerable with the Father. He knew what he was asking meant. He knew what was the plan. It wasn't a surprise for him. But he's feeling so much in his human emotions that he turns to his Father and says, if possible, turn this cup away from me. But here's the turning point. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. Here in this garden is where Jesus chose to do different from humanity in the first garden. In the first garden, humanity chose their own will. Here is Jesus saying, not my human will, but yours. Father, if possible, can we find another plan? If possible. When Jesus says, pass this cup, the cup meant the full weight of sin. The cup meant that what Jesus means here is like all the wrongdoing that the whole humanity has made, it was going to be upon him. He knew what that would cost. He knew the weight of it. And he's saying, Father, if it's possible, pass it away. Can we find another plan? It wasn't a battle, Jesus trying to say to God, I don't want to do it. Do you know your child when they go, not doing it? No, find someone else. That's not what Jesus is doing. He's just opening up his emotions to the Father. But the beautiful thing is, yet, not as I will, but as you will. Jesus had a human will. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't suppress it, but he submits it to the Father. You see, in that moment, Jesus says, Father, this is how I'm feeling. Father, these are my emotions. Father, actually, I don't really, if possible, I would like to not go through this. But Father, I'm going to surrender. Surrender is not passive. Surrender is a choice. Jesus could just have said, okay, let's see what happens. I've thrown it out there to the Father, my emotions. I've actually asked him to pass this cup. Let's see what's going to happen next. Maybe we can sit down and come up with another plan. But in that moment, Jesus chose to look at himself, see how he was feeling, analyze his feelings, his struggles, but still go to the Father and choose and say, your will, not mine. You see, this is what we can learn from Jesus here. The surrender there, it wasn't a defeat. It wasn't Jesus say, I lose and you win. It was actually an act of courage. Of saying, Father, your will. You know, the cross is where the sacrifice happens, but the garden is where the surrender happens. I truly believe that that moment in the garden set the tone for the cross hours later. Because in that moment, in that intimate moment with the Father, Jesus said, yes, I will. It doesn't matter what's going to cost. It doesn't matter what's going to happen. It doesn't matter how much I'm going to suffer. If it's your will, I'll go, and I will do. The moment conquered on the cross at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon is first decided in that moment of intimacy, that human moment of intimacy with the Father. Jesus shows us that when we have our emotions, it's okay. Jesus didn't run away from them. He didn't ignore his emotions. He opened up with vulnerability to the Father, to his close friends and to the Father. And then he decided, I'm going to trust and I'm going to decide to surrender my will to your will. You know, the garden is called Garden of Gethsemane because Gethsemane means olive press. So like I said, in garden, they would grow olives, and then from those olives, they would make olive oil. And the thing about olive oil is the olives go through a process that is crushed, and then it's pressed, and it's pressed. It goes through 3 steps. Jesus prays 3 times, sharing his emotion with God, asking to pass this cup, and saying, not my will, but your will. In that moment, you see how God does everything with a purpose. Jesus went to a place where olives are crushed, are pressed, so then the best olive oil could come from it. They needed to be pressed. The olives need to be pressed under a weight, as you can see in that video, for the olive oil to come out of it. Jesus was pressed in that moment so his blood could come out and save us later. You see how God doesn't do anything unintentionally. In the garden, Jesus is pressed from every single side. Emotionally, spiritually, physically, anticipating what is to come. But he's not overcome by it. He was not overcome by his emotions. And in that pressure, something precious is revealed. Not resistance. Not Jesus saying, Father, no, 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 no. Not running away, but surrender. And from that surrender comes obedience. From obedience comes the cross. From the cross comes salvation. And from salvation comes his glory. You see, the arms stretched wide on the cross began with a face pressed to the ground in surrender. What he conquered and what he did on the cross, it started in that moment that he put his face on the floor and said, your will of surrender. Before the cross, there is a garden. Before the sacrifice, there is surrender. And even before the glory, there was the pressing. And in that moment, in that garden, in the quiet garden, Jesus makes his choice.